It's interesting how narrow those columns are, how light it makes that structure look, even though it's a structure sitting on top of a big block. During the Revolution, all of the heads were removed from these saints. Notice St. Denis, who was beheaded, burying his own head. I've seen this treatment before, where notables apparently are in the arches. Some of them have some identifiable attribute or icon with them, if only we knew what it meant. This is a curious one here. And the one over a little bit farther, a cauldron with somebody's head being boiled in it. And the butt-naked horse rider. Depiction of a small city, maybe a medieval city. What's interesting here is to see the contrast between the restored stone on the front face and a little bit back on the side face and the rest. Gives you an idea of what this might have looked like when it was first built. Notice here the different characters of the gargoyles.
두 번째, 너 연애할 때 햄버거 먹지 마.
More terrifying one. The lightness of Gothic is indicated in these thin columns. Tiers of them almost look like 3 tiers going up. Even the arches, or whatever you want to call the triangular thing above those arches, are light looking with holes in the center to make them even lighter. Here's a side portal. This one appearing to show some kind of baptism, perhaps. And this a crowning. Don't know what the story is. There must be one. Little affectations like these two always intrigue me. What was the point? Why are they there? Why are they so small? What's the relationship one to the other, if any? They're really small little characters. Maybe about 10 inches, maybe a foot high. Looks like a little man, but he's actually should be at the end of that graphic like this one is. Notre Dame. There's still yet another monument to somebody. Pleasant place to sit, particularly as the evening shuts down. Flying buttresses, but these are not the ones that I remember that were so famous. So perhaps they're on the other side. We'll keep looking. But it's interesting to see all the interplay of lines and angles and heights and depths. Again, look at the melange of lines, depth, curves, and those vertical posts. And then the gargoyles. It looks like that area there was finished off, restored to show us what it would look like. Memorial of deportation I want to see, so I need to come back and look at this one. I'd go back inside the church maybe tomorrow. And that's the second island in the river behind Cité. And again, notice here, in 1910 they installed a gauge for the height of the river, plus they had all of these rings to tie up barges or boats or something. Interestingly enough, the foliage is so deep now that this is about the best view that I can find to get a look at those flying buttresses. And then in the full view. Now we are on the left bank, although it doesn't have the illusion to me to what I remember the left bank should look like. Although this is starting to get close to it. Looks like much of it's closed. I bet you tomorrow it's knocked out. Pleasant waterside restaurant experience. Something curious I noticed there are what look like oxidized copper statues climbing steps to heaven. Maybe they're already there. This is the Fontaines Saint-Michel. I thought it was St. Michael's Church, but it's not. Some heroic struggle going on there. It's a Sunday morning, kind of cloudy and rainy at times. This is the Seine near La Cité, which is the island that Notre Dame is on. Notre Dame is behind this building, which is, I don't know what it is, says Défense something or other. Quai de l'Horloge. Quai de l'Horloge and Rue du Palais. And I'm going to walk around to the right here, just get a different view of things. This building, whatever it is, I'll try to identify it in a few minutes. Looks like it's been restored. Got nice color to it. This is the Cour de Cassation. I think this may be the Palace of Justice, but I'm not sure. Saint Martin over there on the, I think that's the right bank. Maybe the large department store that Rick Steves talked about. This whole complex is the Palais de Justice, which I had viewed from down the street a ways yesterday. Restaurant Salon de Bar. And a nice little parklet right across the street from the bar, where perhaps attorneys and clients can relax before the grand assault. A nicely somber day, probably, so far as people, probably because it's somewhat early and the tourists are not out, hopefully intimidated by the rain. I'm a tourist, of course, I know that. I'm talking about the hordes. I believe that's the Louvre. The bells you're hearing come off of Notre Dame, which is to our left, but it's ricocheting off of the buildings across the river there, I think. Did you ever wonder what the back end of a car was for? In other words, the part that's behind the wheels to the back? So did the smart car company, and they eliminated it. And there's Elvis, and you can tell it's Elvis because he's the only one on the boat. He just rented it for himself. Typical Elvis thing. This is the statue of Charlemagne, who has weathered many a rainstorm. Something here, cynicism, irony. And now it's Sunday morning, a service is in process. Probably 1,000 tourists are in the church just roaming around. Some have duped the ushers into believing that they're actually here for the service, so they're on the inside court. And then right across to my left here are all the trinkets and gewgaws that you can buy of your visit to Notre Dame. Nothing seems to be terribly novel about the cloistery. These columns, narrow columns, are interesting. They again add to that lightness. The sides ringed with chapels. I think it's £2 a piece here. The price is higher in Paris to leave a candle. This apparently depicts the resurrection of Jesus Christ. One of the myths of the Catholic Church. Someone tests the veracity of the wound. What's most impressive to me about this church is the fact it was built by and paid for by the small community that lived here. That's astounding. Of the church.
déjà recommandé aux 8 diacres qu'il allait ordonner prêtres d'avoir à annoncer sans crainte l'Évangile dans un monde qui n'est pas prêt à l'écouter. Dans cet Évangile, Jésus manifeste qu'il veut être le maître des éléments. La réflexion des disciples, qui est-il donc pour que même le vent et la mer lui obéissent?
This is an interesting view of the city without any buildings. Where we are now is Île de la Cité, right near Notre Dame. Notice, which I didn't realize, that there's Ile Saint-Martin. I think this is all but totally covered by buildings and pavement. Butte Montmartre, it's up in there somewhere, slightly to the right, that I have my little hotel. This is another view. Here's where we are now, right in there. There's the Louvre to our left. We'll be going back up there. Notice the Eiffel Tower off to the left there. These are the original Roman, Gallic Roman buildings. I assume there's some of these left. I don't know if there are or not. In the center you can see how much the Ile de la Cité was developed. And here is an even later period of time. Doesn't show Notre Dame, so apparently it was not yet built. But it does show several of the Roman. And this was apparently the 3rd century AD in Paris during the Moyen Age. I think the 6th century. And it was now a walled city. Or at least part of it was. Looks like all of it was. This will give you an orientation of where we are. There's the face of Notre Dame, and I entered in right here into the crypts. And the crypts is really an attempt to disclose the various levels of civilization that were here. This is a Gallo-Roman rampart. This is a fascinating expose. You read about civilization on top of civilization, but of course in the books you don't see anything of what it is. Here's a small diagram, or small model of what we're looking at. The rampart we just saw. And there's 2 arcades. There they are. It's fascinating to realize that at each level, an entire civilization lived and then died out, or at least was architecturally and stratigraphically replaced. Again, fascinating to think of the people who walked up and down these stairs, and what was this little space used for. At this location, it was the harbor of Paris, the first harbor of Paris. And here are 2 sections of the wall of the quayside from the 1st century, with one of the jetties, that's that little part right there perhaps, in view. In the 3rd century, the rampart of the city was built on this quayside wall. And those large rocks there with the G are the walls of Paris built on this quayside. There also is some earlier plumbing, I don't know when it is. Some of the remains here are in the 15th and 16th century. These are old rampart walls. Some of them apparently destroyed when basements were built. This stairway that we can see there was during the Middle Ages, and it went to the street and also went further down. As I like to do, it's fun to imagine the man who installed these rocks, never realizing that these rocks would stand out for many thousands of years, hundreds of years after his death, in a museum, and that the placement he was making would not be one of the idle placements of rock on the thousands of billions of rocks installed in Paris over history. At the point we're standing beneath the former Rue Neuve Notre Dame. And these, where Emma is, are the facades of homes. Notice the stairway going up. And then with computers, we could define each of these spaces in its era and literally create stratigraphy levels. And then with computer generation, create the society or as close as we can get to it. This is the front of the Foundlings Hospital built in 1746 through 1749. And these are toothing stones which were supposed to tie into a portico that was never built. Here's a little model of what we're looking at here. I'd have to find out what an gout is. It reminds me of the Chaco Canyon rooms. Notice here how this had been apparently dressed by the installer. This was probably the surface of this wall, the top surface, I mean, until the subsequent wall was built over it. These are the remains of a well that may at some time have been a garbage dump also, probably when they had a better system for water. The Gallo-Roman columns. Interesting to see the foundation for those. These are medieval house foundations. And those look like well holes. This little Roman bronze is apparently one of the most outstanding devices discovered in the excavations. It is pretty. Notice the chest, stomach muscles. That these may have been archways. Well, you can see that this whole thing coming towards me was an archway when you see that start to curve there. This was a Gallo-Roman room with the tiles. Functions not known. It was structurally part of all the other surrounding buildings. Apparently those are some tiles that were found in that room. Whether that opening existed indefinitely or not, I don't know. It looks like it did, or at least somehow it did. The rock structure above it seems to be defining the arch. Here it's talking about heating by hypocaust, Hypocaust. And these are 3 rooms of the 3rd century Gallo-Roman era. And there, of course, are the typical pile of bricks used to create the false underfloor through which the hot air could be circulated for usually baths or something associated with the baths, like I saw in Nimes. It may be that that little archway was part of that heat circulation system. Notice the early Roman column. Again, to one who's knowledgeable or cares to become knowledgeable, all of these levels, like the levels found in sedimentary rock for a geologist, are levels of knowledge of cultures. This is where I hope to go next. I hope that gate right there is it. This entryway is purposely narrow to illustrate symbolically the narrowness of the options and of the journey those who were deported had. And this does the same here. These triangles, I believe, represent the names of the concentration camps. It's interesting that the French say, forgive, but do not forget. I'm unable to forgive. Who do you forgive? Hitler? His henchmen? The SS? The Germans of that day? Germans of today? Germans of the future? All those people and leaders and generals who perpetuate the same thing in other forms and other names in other countries? Who do you forgive? Again, the long, narrow way represents the inevitable, totally controlled journey that these people were forced to take. There is a light bulb, those actually can be lit, I believe, for each of the more than 200,000 French who were killed in those camps. How do you forgive? How do you know that they are penitent? How do you know that they do not believe, or that they know that the gene that precipitated this is not inherent in them? How do we know it's not inherent in all of us? And if that's the case, who do we forgive? A view of Paris in the rain. I'm going to the place that deals with the Nazi Jewish issue.